Welcome to the public meeting for the City of Dinuba Wellfield Remedial Investigation and Feasibility Study Project. Just a few instructions on Microsoft Teams, which I think everybody here is pretty familiar. But if you have any questions, please feel free to click the raise your hand icon, and then you can unmute yourself or mute yourself from this microphone icon here. No one is online or calling in from a telephone, but you can press *6 in the future if you're ever on a call. And then for chat, you just hit the little message bubble there, and then you can type into the meeting chat and hit enter. And speakers will answer questions at the end of each section. And with that, I will turn it over to Sarah to go over the agenda.
Thank you, Trilby. My name is Sarah Raker, and I'm the project manager for this project. And today we're going to discuss an overview of the project team, the Prop 1 funded aspect of the project. Then Mike will discuss the objectives, goals, and benefits of the project. He'll also give you an overview of the city's water supply. He'll discuss the remedial investigation feasibility study tasks that we completed. Then Steve and Kelly will discuss the preferred project and the feasibility study that led to the preferred project. We'll discuss the next steps, and then we'll open it up to public comment and questions and answers. The funding disclosure is as follows. Funding for this project has been provided in full or in part by Proposition 1, the Water Quality, Supply, and Infrastructure Improvement Act of 2014, through an agreement with the State Water Resources Control Board. The contents of this presentation do not necessarily reflect the views and policies of the foregoing, nor does mention of trade names or commercial products constitute endorsement or recommendations for use. The project team. These are the various members of the team for this project, starting off with the California Water Quality Control Board. And the grant program manager is Robin Gilo. The city of Dinuba is led by Ishmael Hernandez, the city project manager, who is the public works director. The formation team, which provided technical project management for hydrogeology and water quality, Mike Titza is the project director, and Sarah Raker is the project manager. And Provost and Pritchard Consulting Group provided project engineering, water treatment, and fieldwork assistance. And Steve Spencer and Kelly McInerney are the lead engineers, and Trilby Barton is our public outreach person. This project also we developed the Technical Advisory Committee and the Stakeholder Advisory Group. The Technical Advisory Committee were representatives from key agencies. They provided review and advice on the project progress and direction, and we met with them quarterly to give them an overview of the key documents as well as the progress we were making. The Stakeholder Advisory Group was made up of community members, including agency representatives from non-governmental organizations. And again, we provided progress on the key documents. We asked for input and comments, and we met quarterly. And we also posted the results of the meetings, the presentations, and summaries of the meetings on the City of Dinuba project website. And now I'll hand it over to Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike Titza. I'm the project director for Formation. I'm going to be giving you an overview of the remedial investigation feasibility study, what led to the project, and what our findings were for the remedial investigation. And then I'll turn it over to Steve Spencer and to Kelly McInerney to talk about the feasibility study. So just to kind of give you an overview of the setting and the problem statement, the problem that we're trying to address with this project. So Dinuba is a disadvantaged community in a predominantly agricultural area, and like many similar communities in the San Joaquin Valley, its sole water supply, municipal water supply, is groundwater. And it's located in what's called the Kings Groundwater Subbasin, which is outlined in black. And that subbasin is considered critically overdrafted, which means groundwater levels are declining and there's adverse consequences from that. So under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, the Kings River East Groundwater Sustainability Agency, or GSA, was formed to bring the basin back into sustainable management. And in addition to the overdraft problems, there's widespread groundwater impacts in the region from nitrate, which was used as an agricultural fertilizer and is also in septic wastewater or septic systems, and also confined animal operations. And that's impacted shallow groundwater in many areas in the vicinity. And what's called DBCP, or dibromochloropropane, which was an agricultural chemical used to treat soils to help plant growth or help prevent plant disease and stress. And because of its toxicity and mobility, that was banned in the 1970s, late 1970s. But it still impacts, a number of wells in the San Joaquin Valley, and is a problem that then needs to be treated. And similar to that, 1,2,3-TCP, or trichloropropane, is a chemical that was contained in a soil treatment chemical and has similar toxicity and mobility problems, and has impacted municipal supply wells in the area. And you may have heard about some of these in the news. The nature of the nitrate, DBCP, and TCP contamination is such that it's very widespread. It's what's called non-point source pollution. So it's not from one particular release site. Its release was very widespread in agricultural operations, and that makes it harder to address and to clean up. And with respect to nitrate, the Regional Water Quality Control Board has recently adopted a nitrate management program, or nitrate control program, for the establishment of nitrate management zones to help to improve water quality and to help to control the loading of nitrate into the shallow groundwater system. And that's recently been implemented in the Dinuba area and in the Kings Subbasin. So in order to address these issues, the project, the city of Dinuba received a $1.75 million grant from the State Water Resources Control Board to implement the Dinuba Wellfield Remedial Investigation Feasibility Study, or RIFS project. And that's a study of potential project options to clean up or prevent the spread of this non-point source contamination in the municipal well field. So that's why it's the Wellfield RIFS. And the aim of the project is to identify an effective way to address this contamination and identify projects that can be funded under future implementation grants. And really the objective is to provide the city with a more secure and higher quality water supply. And it also looks at projects that can present additional benefits other than just water quality, but maybe combined water quality and recharge benefits that help to address the overdraft issue. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of the city's water supply system. So this map shows in purple the outline of the city limits, which is also the limits within, it's also the city's water service area within which the city provides municipal water service. The green dashed line is the city's sphere of influence from a planning perspective. The blue lines are either creeks or ditches, delivery canals for Alta Irrigation District. The little green circles are active city supply wells, The little red dots are test wells that were drilled and sampled at one point or another. There's a couple of yellow circles, one near the golf course to the west of the city and one near the middle of the city near a park. And those are, and one in the southern part of the city near a park. And those used to be, two of those used to be city water supply wells, municipal supply wells, but they were converted to irrigation wells because of contamination in the wells. That's harmful to humans, but not to plants, and harmful to humans if they drink it. The gray wells are wells that were taken offline because of contamination. And the blue squares and other blue areas are stormwater retention basins or recharge ponds, and those are important because they provide recharge from surface water to the aquifer system. And the rust-colored outlines on the west side of the city are where the city's wastewater treatment, or the city's wastewater reclamation facility is located, and those are the ponds where the treated wastewater is discharged. And those are also important because they help that treated water helps to recharge the groundwater. So the challenge is that Dinuba has had to remove a number of wells due to the nitrate DBCP or TCP contamination. And water from some of the other wells, specifically from well 14, has to go through carbon treatment to remove chemicals and provide clean water that meets the drinking water requirements. And the city is 100% reliant on groundwater to meet its municipal demand, and that demand is only going to increase over time. And potentially the water quality issues are going to persist. So we'd like to find ways to deal with those. One way to deal with them is just to drill deeper wells or to treat water at the wellheads, but that alone does not solve or clean up the issues in the shallow aquifer. So the opportunity is that Dinuba is an ideal location to do a study of this type because Dinuba has a lot of information available about its aquifer system and about water quality. There's been a model built by the United States Geological Survey, that's USGS, and studies of regional nitrate contamination that were conducted in the area around Dinuba as part of what's called the CV Salts program, which is part of the Regional Water Quality Control Board's initiative, part of the state's initiative to address nitrate impacts from agricultural activities. And the city also has a lot of data available regarding water quality and regarding its well operations. There are state databases, and then there were the regional studies done for CV salts. And an additional opportunity is there's some new technology for profiling wells, municipal wells, and their interaction with aquifer system and with potential contaminants in the aquifer system that can tell you exactly at what levels the wells interact with the contaminants so that you can figure out how to address it. So the project approach, at the top there you see compile and collect data, and that's the remedial investigation. So there's a lot of different databases available, and we collected data from existing wells, and that feeds into the development of a groundwater model. So that helps us to build a computer model about the behavior of groundwater underneath the city and what different pumping or recharge alternatives might do to water quality, what benefit they might have. Or on the other hand, if they have unintended consequences, that would tell us, the model could tell us that. That information is combined with and feeds into an engineering evaluation of different alternatives. We establish screening criteria to evaluate the performance of the alternatives, turn the crank in the feasibility study, and select what would be a preferred implementation project based on its superior performance. So this just gives you an idea of the wide range of available data. There are a number of different data sources that can be used that are fairly rich for informing a project of this type, ranging from the City of Dinuba data various different online databases maintained by the state and that include state and federal and other data. There are existing hydrologic models that can be used of the area. I mentioned the chemical and hydraulic profiling and well sampling. The Department of Water Resources has reports for each well that's completed that give you an idea of what kind of sediments they're completed in, to what depth, and how those wells might behave. And then there's other published plans and reports, and all those were fed into a database for analysis. So in terms of the actual sampling that was done, we sampled wells that exist in the city, and those include both supply wells as well as monitoring wells that are installed strictly for the purpose of monitoring water quality at several different depths beneath the city. We conducted the supply well profiling, and ambient means we conducted it with the well turned off. And then we also did it with the wells turned on to gather more information about how those wells interact with the aquifer. And then opportunistic sampling just means that there's other sampling programs out there where people were already collecting data, and we asked them to collect some data for us as well. So we were able to collect additional data relatively cheaply. So this is kind of a summary of the total of what we did. We had 26 different wells that we sampled. We had 36 wells for which we evaluated pumping data, 57 wells that we used to evaluate what the aquifer characteristics or what the subsurface sediment characteristics are in terms of how well they yield groundwater and what kind of contaminant transport characteristics they might have. We looked at 387 boring logs that were available from the state's database of well completion records. We looked at 140 wells to prepare contaminant contour maps in our detailed study area. And we looked at data from 520 wells in the surrounding area to help inform our evaluation within that detailed study area so that we could get a more solid grasp on what the distribution of that nitrate, TCP, and DBCP was. So this just shows you, again, in purple is the city limits and water service area. In green is our detailed study area. That's the area for which we built our detailed computer model. And that area that's outlined in fuchsia is our larger study area within which we collected data to help inform what's going on inside the green box. And we looked at data, groundwater levels around the city are about 80 feet below ground surface, plus or minus, depending on where you are. And we looked at data separately in the shallow zone because we know that the shallow zone is more vulnerable to impacts from agricultural and other surface activities. And then we looked at the deep zone, but we looked at, in our model, we looked at an upper portion of the deep zone, roughly the upper 200 feet of the deep zone, and then the lower deep zone, which is roughly up to 400 to 600 feet deep. And it actually extends deeper, but the city wells, their maximum depth is at about 600 feet. So that's where we focused most of our activity. So this is a contour map. So it's similar to like a topographic map that shows elevations. So the blue contours show the elevations of the groundwater surface in 2005. And we have other contour maps in the report, but that basically shows that the groundwater flow and levels were similar in the shallow groundwater as in the deep groundwater. And the arrows show the directions of flow, which were kind of toward the south to southwest. Now this map, it's one of several, and it shows the contaminant concentrations that were found. And this one is for nitrate. And red are concentrations that exceed the maximum concentration level in drinking water that's allowable in drinking water. And anything less than red is below that concentration. And so this is in the shallow groundwater. This is not being used as a source of drinking water for the city of Dinuba. But in some of the surrounding areas, there are domestic wells that may be influenced by this water, and then part of the project objective is to see if we can clean that shallow groundwater up. And the state has programs to identify the domestic well users that might be impacted and to help them going forward as part of the nitrate management zone program. And we're wanting to see, can we implement a project that will help to meet the objectives of that program as well. So the interesting thing that you see here is that way over to the left, way over to the west, you see kind of a green corner that's near the Kings River. That's kind of expected. Near the river, you would have recharge that would tend to clean up or dilute the nitrate pollution. In the agricultural areas around the city, you see higher impacts. And interestingly, in the vicinity of the wastewater reclamation facility and golf course, you see lower impacts. And that's a result of low nitrate recharge in that treated wastewater from which nitrate has been removed. And then the city has a program going there called the RCR, or Reclamation, Conservation, and Recreation Project, where it pumps some of the shallow groundwater and uses it to irrigate the golf course, which uses up the nitrate in that process. And the combination of those two things have created some improvement in the groundwater quality in that green area in that western panhandle that you see. This shows the deeper level. And the white areas are simply areas where we don't have data available, so we don't extrapolate the impacts there. But you can see that the groundwater quality is much better in the deeper zone than in the shallow zone, and that's expected. But in some areas in the west, it does look like some impact has been drawn deeper down into the aquifer system. This shows DBCP. DBCP, you can see that there are a couple of areas where there's some localized impacts, but in the shallow aquifer, for the most part, DBCP concentrations are currently low. But in the deeper aquifer, in some areas, the concentrations remain elevated. The reason for that is when DBCP was banned in, I think it was 1977. Since that time, it's been moving through the aquifer system, and we believe it's gone through the shallow aquifer, but it's still impacting some areas in the deeper aquifer. Well 14, the city, was at one point impacted by DBCP above the drinking water level. It was always treated to make sure that clean water was delivered. But concentrations have slowly decreased over time, but they do remain at above 50% of the MCL in well 14, and that's you can see that kind of in the south central part of the city. TCP, somewhat different story. There are some shallow impacts by TCP in the area. And there's some deeper impacts, and notably, well 14 has TCP impacts, and it is being treated to remove that TCP, but finding ways to deal with that and clean it up over time would be desirable. So hence that was evaluated in the project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve and Kelly.
Great, thanks, Mike. I'm Steve Spencer. I'm the principal civil engineer here at Provo and Pritchard. And I'm going to start us off here, and then I'll turn it over to Kelly to explain some of the projects. So basically, the feasibility study process that we work on is a three-step process. The first step, where we kind of take sort of all the ways that we might be able to solve this problem and throw them in a hopper, analyze which ones should go on and which ones we can screen out using some screening criteria, which we'll discuss. The alternatives that make it past that first screening process then are grouped into scenarios here. We built scenarios that we could test using some of the modeling that Mike just showed you the results for, and we can do some cost estimating and some other analysis to ultimately then identify the preferred project in the third step, the project we think is the best positioned to go forward. So here are the initial criteria that we use to determine which of those technologies or which of the solutions would be worthy to continue on and review. We wanted to make sure any solution that we proposed was going to meet the standards of the regulatory agencies, and including the city of Dinuba, that the community itself was going to find it acceptable, that it could be implemented, basically constructability, and then it had a low risk and low uncertainty. So looking at all of those, if the solution then failed any of those categories, then we basically discarded it, and the rest of them moved on. So ultimately, then with the solutions that did make that pass these criteria, we assembled them into all scenarios or alternatives and analyzed those separately. And Kelly will take us through each of the 6 that we assembled.
All right, so based on the approved technological approaches, we were then able to implement those into 6 scenarios. So scenarios 1 and 5, they utilize managed aquifer recharge, and then scenarios 2, 3, and 4 utilize administrative controls, and I'm going to discuss all of these scenarios in further detail in the upcoming slides. So for scenario 1, we're using managed aquifer recharge, and this project was actually laid out in the groundwater sustainability plan by the Kings River East GSA. So in this scenario, there's 60 acres in the northeast part of town that will be used to infiltrate 1,700 acre feet annually. So this area that's specified in that northeast corner of the city is not currently city-owned land, and the volume of water has not been looked into with AID. We still need to confirm all of those values, so there is still some uncertainty with this scenario, specifically with the city-owned land. So in scenario 2, we're using administrative controls at well 14. So currently at well 14, there is treatment on the site to treat for TCP. So in this scenario, we propose increasing the pumping to the max capacity of the well to utilize the treatment that is already on site. And with this increase in pumping at well 14, we would then be decreasing pumping at the nearby wells, which is well 16 and well 20. In conjunction with that, the future wells, well 21, 22, and 23, would be split into two wells instead of just one well location. And at each of the locations, there would be a shallow well and then a deeper well. And this would help to balance pumping from the upper deep and deep zones to prevent drawdown of TCP. And well 21 is currently in the works at the city, but wells 22 and 23 have a horizon of 5 and 10 years, respectively. So in scenario 3, we're also using administrative controls, but in this scenario, we would be relying on well modification and land application. So as Mike discussed earlier, in the southwest portion of the town, the reclamation facility is infiltrating clean water, and there's such a large volume of clean water being infiltrated there that the nitrate-laden water, which is usually in the shallow zone, has been pushed to the deeper zones. So the RCR well, which Mike also mentioned, is currently in the shallow zone. So that water that's being pumped and applied to the golf course is currently pumping water with little to no nitrate. So in this scenario, we've proposed installing a new RCR well that would be in the deep zone, and that would help capture nitrate-laden water that has been pushed into the deeper zones from that clean water at the reclamation facility. And the water from this new well would then be applied to the golf course, which would be able to uptake the nitrogen in the water. So then in scenario 4, again, we're using administrative controls, But in this scenario, we would be relying on ex situ pumping, so pumping the water out of the ground and then applying it to predominantly sports playing fields and other large turf areas, such as schools. So we identified 4 areas throughout the city, and at each of these 4 areas, we would be installing a new shallow well, and then we would just be pumping to irrigate those specific portions of land identified. And this would have benefits that would be twofold, because not only would we be removing the nitrate-laden water, but then the water that's applied for irrigation would allow the turf to uptake the nitrates. Then in scenario 5, we're going back to managed aquifer recharge. And this scenario would utilize 3 recharge basins that are already in place near well 14. In addition to expanding those basins, so deepening and improving them, we would also be expanding with a new basin to the northwest portion of the current basins. So that would add another 10 acres for infiltration. And then Centennial Park, which is to the north of the basins, is currently used as a stormwater basin. However, during storm events, water from Centennial Park is currently pumped into Horseman's Ditch, which is an AID canal. So in this scenario, we've proposed connecting the Centennial Park stormwater basin to the well 14 basins so that the water could be pumped from the park to the basins so that the water could be infiltrated rather than sent out to the canals and away from the city. In addition to the infiltration at well 14, we've also proposed adding 2 new wells to the south of the basins, which would be in the upper deep zone, and they would produce 400 acre-feet annually. And this is part of the city's expansion plans. These would be non-potable wells. And the purpose of these wells is also to help pull the water that's being infiltrated at well 14 into those deeper zones and improve cleanup of the aquifer. Then in scenario 6, we relied on a technical memo prepared by AECOM on the drainage basin capacity analysis of the city. And in that technical memo, AECOM identified which of the city's current stormwater retention basins had the potential for expansion. So here, the basins that have the potential for expansion are circled in red. And by expanding these basins, we would be able to capture more stormwater during events, because currently the city is having to pump water out of their stormwater retention basins and have that water go to canals and so forth. But by retaining that stormwater, then we would be able to infiltrate it. However, we don't have any data on the current volume that's infiltrated at these basins or how much water the city is losing by pumping water out of these stormwater basins. So for this reason, this scenario was not explored any further, so it won't be addressed in the upcoming slides. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and give it back to Steve.
Thanks, Kelly. So I'll cover now the ranking of the 5 scenarios that we reviewed, that Kelly just went over and discussed in ultimately the preferred project that we propose to be implemented. These are the criteria that were used at this phase to look at each of those projects or each of those scenarios and determine which ones are more effective at what we're hoping to achieve. We looked at effectiveness, and that was weighted heavier, given a higher rating. Cost, of course, risk and uncertainty, promotion of groundwater sustainability, and then the grant program priorities and preferences, because the money that the city is requesting has specific requirements that go with it. So using those criteria and scoring, we ranked each of the alternatives from highest to lowest in each of the categories there. On the next slide is the scoring table. And I'm not going to go through it all, but essentially the two highest scoring alternatives were the new RCR well, that's scenario number 3, administrative controls, and the managed aquifer recharge at the well 14 basin, scenario 5. So those two scenarios scored the highest. The next slide kind of goes over the reasons why. You can see again that scenario 3 was the first rank, and scenario 5 was rank 2, although they're so close together, essentially tied. Scenario number 1, which was the GSP project, showed excellent performance in the modeling, but it's very uncertain that project can be constructed in time under the grants window for funding, and also the cost of the land that needs to be acquired can be significant. So that's why that scenario was left out or was ranked lower. Scenario number 2, the rebalanced pumping at well 14 to increase the amount of TCP that would be pumped out of the ground, and the new wells showed only a limited impact on the groundwater quality, and so it was ranked 4th. And then the 5th ranked scenario was the shallow pumping applied to the playing fields and so forth. The groundwater model showed almost no impact to the groundwater quality on that scenario, and so it had the lowest rank. So taking scenarios 3 and 5 that now become, because they're ranking and because they're the obvious benefit, those now become the preferred project. So we're proposing to combine those two scenarios into a single project. We found, and I'll show you on the next slide, that those two scenarios actually benefited when they were run in the model simultaneously. It was actually an increase in effectiveness over even the two models by themselves, when they're run by themselves. So this slide shows you a 20-year and a 50-year window of how the groundwater was improved with the preferred project scenario running based on the groundwater model that was prepared for the project. The darker blue indicates more improvement in groundwater quality, and obviously the biggest impact is recharging of fresh surface water into the well 14 basins. But in the upper deep zone, the pumping at the RCR well does show also an improvement, and it seems to be increased because of the recharge of cleaner water there at the well 14 basins. So, Mike, I want to give you a chance if there's anything you want to add, because it was your team that put this model together.
Yeah, sure. So this shows nitrate just kind of as an example, but similar results were produced for the DBCP and the TCP. And again, what's happening here, if you remember, groundwater flows from the northeast toward the southwest. So you can see this area of improvement kind of follows the direction of groundwater flow. And what happens is the recharge basins are at the head of this improvement area, and they recharge the clean groundwater, while the non-potable wells pull that groundwater out of the system. And then those non-potable wells would be used to distribute the water to landscape uses in the city expansion area, the future planned expansion area on the west side of the city. And when they're provided, when that water is provided to plants, those plants use the nitrogen, and that cleans up the water. And so in effect, what you're doing is you're balancing pumping of the water, using those non-potable wells with the injection. And some of the clean water continues to migrate down gradient, where it would be expected to benefit any domestic well users in that area. And then an additional plan that would not be part of the project, but would be part of the city's Wellfield expansion plan that would be implemented, 5-10 years down the road, would be to install the city's expansion wells in that area where the water quality is protected and cleaned up.
Thanks, Mike. I'll make the point, and I talked a little bit about the first scenario, recharging surface water to the northeast part of the city, and that did show similar benefit. You can imagine if the green and blue coloration area was shifted up to the northeast corner of the city, that there would be a benefit there, but that the city doesn't own the land, the cost of the land is expensive, and the time frame to implement that project would be very lengthy. The benefit to scenario 5 here is that the city already owns those basins. They're already connected to Alta irrigation districts, so water can be delivered easily with minimal new facilities constructed, and the area there is already set aside for this type of activity, so there wouldn't be any necessarily loss of land that could be used for other things like new housing developments or commercial and so forth. So the benefits there are outweigh the benefits of other scenarios that we examined.
Yeah, Steve, if I could just interject real briefly. I mean, a number of these other scenarios, just because we set them aside in this ranking doesn't mean that they don't have no benefit and wouldn't be considered in the future. And that scenario 1 especially is something that could be considered in the future. It just needs more time to ferret out the delivery of the water and land control and so forth. I also wanted to point out that, we show those basins at a certain location. That's a strictly theoretical location. The city, at this point, is not in negotiations with any particular landowner, and the basins very well may be located somewhere different. So those are just theoretically simulated locations at this point.
Right. For scenario 1, we had to put them somewhere so we could model it. So that's where we picked. But you're right. It's completely theoretical. Okay, the next slides basically show the map of the preferred project alternative. Essentially, it's a combination of scenarios 3 and 5 that Kelly had shown earlier. The recharge would go into the existing basins along with some expanded basins. Those at near well 14, those basins would be deepened to increase the amount of water we could recharge. And then a pipe, as Kelly mentioned, the pipe would connect the nearby Centennial Park, so we could recover additional stormwater during stormwater events. Those basins currently also collect a lot of stormwater out of the downtown area, so we'll be improving recharge here to help get that into the ground beneath the city. The RCR well essentially would just be a replacement, very close to where it is located now, and operation there wouldn't change. The two together, and the next slide kind of shows a close-up of the basin area, just for reference. In the blue circles, those are the existing basins. The light green L shape would be an expansion of the westernmost basin, with a pipeline coming from Centennial Park, which is currently used for groundwater. So that is the preferred project. On the next slide, if you want to go to the next slide, we have some of the design assumptions, approximately how much water we could recharge based on discussions with the Alta Irrigation District and over how many days. And then the next slide includes our preliminary cost estimate for budgeting purposes, the various basins, working on each of the basins, the pipeline, installation of 3 new wells, the 2 down gradient from the basins, and then the new RCR well. There's a subtotal for construction and a contingency. This project estimate doesn't include non-construction costs, which will add another $1.3 million to the total. So you're looking at a total project cost of somewhere in the neighborhood of $7.5 million. This estimate and the cost estimate was based on recent similar projects that we have experience with, and other sources of information on construction costs. And it's going to be used as part of the application to the state for funding the project. At that point, I think we're finished on our end. Trilby, if we want to open it for questions.
Yes. Does anybody have any questions or comments that they'd like to make?
Trilby, this is Sarah. I just wanted to, I guess, say one more time that the documents that we're preparing are available on the website, the project website. And that would be the remedial investigation report, the groundwater tech memo, and the feasibility study report. And those will all be available to the public online at the Dinuba project website.
Oh, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, Trilby, maybe we just ask if any, if nobody has any comments or questions, then I don't know if Ishmael wanted to make any closing remarks, the Public Works Director, City of Dinuba.
Yeah, the only thing I have to say, Mike, is same as I've been saying, thank you guys for all your hard work on this, to you and your staff, Steve and his staff, and just been very pleased with this. And also Robin, thank you very much for working with us on this, and Robert up until his retirement, and Alex since then. We appreciate that, and we're looking forward to making sure that $1.75 million didn't go to waste on a plan, that we get something implemented out of this. And that's the hope, and want to make sure that Dinuba has clean water for many years to come.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ishmael. All right, final call for questions or comments. All right, with that, thank you all for attending tonight's public outreach meeting for the City of Dinuba's Wellfield RIFS project, and we will see you all later.